So the Iowa Democratic Party announced how many of the national delegates they're going to be giving each of the candidates after their sham, messed up, botched election. The Democratic Party went out, they've come out and said, you know what, that's okay, even though we're going to be doing a recount, even though there's some issues with the reporting and issues with the numbers and issues with the math, we're going to go ahead and decide on how many national delegates each of the candidates are going to be getting. So get ready to do some math, guys, because this is where things showcase to be really, really screwy. You cannot mess with math. Math doesn't lie. And yet we'll see exactly how democratic our elections actually are by looking into this process. So there were some original reports coming out that the Iowa Democratic Party was going to be giving Pete Buttigieg 14 of their 41 pledged delegates to the national convention and Bernie Sanders 12. That in and of itself set off alarm bells because the two men were pretty much tied with the numbers when it came to the delegate count. Now, Bernie Sanders won the popular vote, but the way it translated to the actual state delegate equivalents put Pete Buttigieg in the lead by 2 state delegate equivalent votes. But somehow those 2 translated to 2 more of the national pledge delegates. Now, that was crazy. So the Iowa Democratic Party has actually backed off from that, and they're now giving Pete Buttigieg 13 and Bernie Sanders 12. So they're claiming that those extra 2 state delegate equivalents are equal to 1 more national pledged delegate. But again, we're going to do the math here, and we're going to see how big of a screwed up mess this is. And to be quite honest with you, the person who should be the most upset is Amy Klobuchar. She got the most screwed. We're going to do the math. She got the most screwed in this, and she should be the person screaming the most about this, but of course she's not. She doesn't want to take on the establishment. A lot of people don't want to take on the establishment. They see what happens. They saw what happened to Tulsi Gabbard. She's been essentially shunned, and no one's talking about her after she took on the DNC and after she took on Hillary Clinton. So I can kind of understand how gun shy a lot of them are for speaking, to speak up, but Amy Klobuchar really should be. So let's go ahead and do the math here. So Iowa gets 41 delegates to the national convention. They actually get 49 because they get 8 super delegates. But again, super delegates just get to vote however they want because, they're protecting the party. But we're going to eliminate the super delegates, and we're going to just focus on the 41 that are pledged from the caucus, supposedly. 41 national delegates. Now, Iowa, they have all these precincts. They have all these caucuses. They've got about over 1,600 precincts. They give each of the precincts what they call state delegate equivalents. And then in the end, those state delegate equivalents are supposed to translate to national pledged delegates. So they give out, during their caucus, 2,152 state delegate equivalents. So what makes the most sense is to then divide that 2,152 by 41. And that would give you the number of state delegates that would be equivalent, as they're calling them, state delegate equivalents, to national delegates at the convention, to one of their 41. So you divide this up, 2,152, divide that by 41, you end up with 52.48. That's the number that you end up with, okay? So Iowa rounds down if it's under 0.5, and Iowa rounds up if it's over 0.5, so we'll say it's 52. So 52 state delegate equivalents would be equal to one of the national delegates to the convention, one of the 41. Oh, but is it? Oh, no. Now, what they've done is Pete Buttigieg received 564. And according to them, he gets 13 at this point of the national delegates. So that means 43 of his state delegate equivalents equals one of his national convention delegates. So that's 43. Now, if you take Bernie Sanders, 562, and you divide that by the 12 that they're giving him, he has to get 46 state delegate equivalents in order to equal one national convention delegate. So Pete Buttigieg only has to get 43 to equal one, but Bernie Sanders has to get 46 to equal one. If that doesn't smell, that's clearly bullshit, guys, right? I mean, the math, that's not democracy right there to say, well, you need to get more than the other guy. That's the way this is going to work. Now, it gets worse as we go down the line. Elizabeth Warren has 388 state delegate equivalents, and they only gave her 8 of the national delegate equivalent. So she needs to get 48.5. So for every 48 state delegate equivalents, that gives her 1 national convention delegate. So Pete Buttigieg needs 43, Bernie Sanders needs 46, Elizabeth Warren needs 48. Joe Biden, he had 340 state delegate equivalents. If you divide that by the 6 he receives, he had to get 56 state delegate equivalents in order to get 1 to the national convention. How is this making any sense at all? And Amy Klobuchar, she was given 1, even though she received 264 state delegate equivalents. So she had to get 264 state delegate equivalents in order to equal 1 delegate to the national convention. 264 compared to Pete Buttigieg's 43. How is this democracy? Somebody explain this to me. So the way the math should have gone is you take the 2,152 and you divide that by 41. That gives you 52.48. So that gives you 52. What they should have done is taken everybody's state delegate equivalent numbers and divided it by 52, and that gives you the number of delegates to the national convention you would receive. That's fair, right? So if they would have done it this way, then Pete Buttigieg would have ended up with 11. He would have received 11 votes. Bernie Sanders, his 562 would also have come out to 11. It would have come out pretty much exactly the same. They would have been tied, which would have been fair considering Bernie Sanders won the popular vote, but it didn't translate in that way to state delegate equivalents, but their state delegate equivalents were almost exactly the same. We're talking the difference of 2, 564 to 562. These guys should end up with the exact same number of pledged delegates. So 11 and 11. Elizabeth Warren should have ended up with 7. If you divide her 388 by 52, she would have ended up with 7. Joe Biden also would have ended up with 7 because when you take 340 and divide that by 52, and then you have to round up, he also ends up with 7. So those two would have been tied as well. And Amy Klobuchar, her 264 should have ended up with 5 of the national pledged delegates. Instead, they gave her 1. So I have scoured the web upside down and sideways to figure out where they came up with their mathematical equation. I read their manual, their 77-page Iowa Delegate Selection Plan manual that's put out by the Iowa Democratic Party. I found nothing to how they justify this math. I found nothing to how they even give out state delegate equivalents to the various precincts, how they even calculate that out. I found nothing. I found nothing that then says how they then translate these supposed state delegate equivalents to national delegates. I found nothing. But what we can see by just doing some basic math is that it's not fair. It looks rigged. It is rigged. And I don't know how anybody's okay with this. I certainly don't know how Amy Klobuchar is okay with this. Of course, Bernie Sanders and Pete Buttigieg have both asked for a recanvassing. Pete Buttigieg believes that the satellite caucuses where Bernie Sanders won by a landslide, he believes they were given too many state delegate equivalents. And Bernie Sanders believes that there was a lot of precincts where they didn't calculate it out correctly, and perhaps he actually won more state delegate equivalents than were reported. So there's a huge... Iowa's just a flat-out mess. This is what it's come down to. It's a mess from the fact that Pete Buttigieg was able to pay this company that developed the app that was supposed to be doing the reporting for the caucuses. He pays them over $40,000. The app fails. Pete Buttigieg somehow ends up winning, declares himself winner before there's any reported votes at all. Then you've got this whole national delegate equivalent, a state delegate equivalent to national delegates. This whole thing that doesn't make any sense. This is a mess. Iowa just needs to be last next time, or they need to get rid of their caucus. They've got a problem. This is not democracy. This has now put the entire election, it's the beginning point, and it just completely skewed the path of the election. This is democracy, folks. This is the Democratic Party's idea of democracy. So just wanted to give you an update on what is going on in Iowa and break down the math for you to show you that it is a bigger sham, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger of a sham each day that goes by with Iowa. So that is what is going on there. Democracy for you. That's democracy.